Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt. We all think we know her story, right? The love affair with Mark Antony, the asp, the dramatic downfall. But was she really just a tragic queen? Or was there something more to her? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going deep into the mystery of Cleopatra's death, trying to separate fact from fiction. And we've got some fascinating sources for this deep dive. Excerpts from academic articles, even a recent online article that's causing quite a buzz. It's all about a tunnel that just might or might not lead to Cleopatra's tomb. Plus, we've got some good background info from Wikipedia. So what really happened to Cleopatra?
It's easy to get caught up in all the romance and drama, but what I find really interesting is that Cleopatra was incredibly shrewd. Politically, I mean. She wasn't just trying to survive. She was playing a high-stakes game, trying to preserve her dynasty, her children, and of course, her kingdom.
Right, because she was the last of the Ptolemaic pharaohs.
Exactly. And the Ptolemies, well, they were a fascinating bunch. They were actually descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, and they ruled Egypt for centuries, blending Greek and Egyptian culture.
So she was inheriting this incredible legacy.
Exactly. But by Cleopatra's time, Egypt was under immense pressure from Rome.
And that's where Mark Antony comes in.
Yeah.
He was this powerful Roman general, became her ally, and, well, more than just an ally.
Their relationship was definitely a passionate love affair, but it was also a strategic alliance. Together, they challenged the rising power of Octavian, the one who would later become the first Roman emperor, Augustus.
So it was almost like a clash of titans, this battle for control of the Mediterranean world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this clash, it really reached a turning point at the Battle of Actium back in 31 BC.
Actium, the epic naval battle that changed the course of history.
Indeed.
And unfortunately for Antony and Cleopatra, it was a decisive defeat.
It was.
They had to flee back to Egypt. But they couldn't escape Octavian's relentless pursuit.
No, they couldn't.
Okay, so they're cornered, facing the full might of Rome. What happens next? Well, our sources actually mention some conflicting accounts about their deaths, and that's where the intrigue really kicks in.
It does, and that's also where Cleopatra's political maneuvering becomes even more fascinating. One of the accounts we have is from Plutarch, the ancient historian. He tells us that Antony, believing Cleopatra was already dead, took his own life.
Wait, so Antony killed himself based on a rumor?
That's what the story says. Makes you wonder, though. Did Cleopatra deliberately spread this false news? Was it part of a larger scheme? Remember, she was famous for her intelligence and her ability to play her enemies against each other. So was Antony's suicide, in a way, part of her plan?
Whoa, that's a pretty bold theory. So even in her darkest hour, she's still strategizing, still trying to outmaneuver Octavian.
It's definitely a possibility, and it adds a whole new layer to the story. We do know that after Antony's death, Cleopatra was captured by Octavian's forces. She was desperate to protect her children and maintain some semblance of power.
And this is where that whole Roman triumph thing comes into play, right? Cleopatra was terrified of being paraded through the streets of Rome as a captive.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit more about what that entailed?
Sure. A Roman triumph was essentially a giant propaganda spectacle. The victorious general. They would ride through the city in a chariot, showcasing the spoils of war and the defeated enemies. For Cleopatra, it would have been the ultimate humiliation, the last pharaoh of a proud dynasty. To be displayed like that, it would have meant the total erasure of her power and legacy.
So she's captured. Her lover is dead.
Yeah.
And she's facing this horrific prospect of being paraded through Rome. I can only imagine how desperate she must have been. And this is where the story takes its most dramatic turn. Her death. So Cleopatra is now Octavian's prisoner. And, the iconic image we have is of her dying by asp bite, but how accurate is that, really?
Well, that's the question that has fascinated historians and just the public, really. For centuries, the asp narrative, it's dramatic. The venomous snake smuggled in a basket of figs, the queen calmly accepting her fate. It fits the image of Cleopatra as this larger-than-life figure, but when you actually dig into the sources, a more complex picture emerges.
Okay, so let's unpack those sources. What are the different theories about how Cleopatra actually died?
Well, we have accounts from ancient writers, like Plutarch, Cassius, Strabo, but they offer some conflicting details. Some mention a poisonous ointment, others describe a sharp implement that might have been used to introduce poison, and then, of course, there's the asp, which is like the most popular version. But even that has variations. Was it a cobra, a viper, or something else entirely?
Yeah, back then, people were already debating the details. It's like a historical whodunit. But what about modern scholarship? Has there been any scientific evidence to support any of these theories?
Unfortunately, no. Cleopatra's tomb has never been found, so we don't have any physical remains to examine. And even if we did, the technology of the time might not have left any detectable traces of the poison.
Oh, that is so frustrating. So we might never know for sure how she died, but I was reading that some researchers today are actually challenging the asp narrative, like altogether.
That's right. There are some logistical issues with the asp story. Smuggling a venomous snake into a heavily guarded room, I mean, that would have been incredibly difficult. And then there's the question of the speed of death. Some venoms are very fast-acting, others take hours to kill. Would Cleopatra have really chosen such an unpredictable method?
Good point. Okay, so if not the asp, then what? What are some of the alternative theories that modern researchers are exploring?
Well, some experts point to the possibility of a poisonous concoction, maybe a mixture of herbs and toxins, something that could have been easily concealed and administered. Cleopatra was known to have a deep knowledge of plants and their properties, after all.
Oh, right. So it's possible she concocted her own poison, choosing a method that was both effective and, in a way, symbolic, using her knowledge of nature to control her own destiny.
That's a compelling interpretation. And then there's the theory that she might have used a sharp object, like a hairpin, to introduce poison into a wound. This method would have been quick and relatively painless.
It's amazing to think that even after all this time, there are still so many unanswered questions about Cleopatra's death. But while we may never know exactly how she died, the exploration of these different theories, it gives us a fascinating glimpse into the world she lived in, the medical knowledge of the time, and all the political intrigue that surrounded her.
Absolutely. And this exploration also takes us on another journey, the search for Cleopatra's lost tomb. You mentioned an article about a tunnel that might lead to her final resting place.
Yes. This article is really intriguing. It talks about a recent discovery near the temple of Taposiris Magna in Egypt, a massive tunnel, over 4,000 feet long. And the archaeologist leading the excavation, Kathleen Martinez, she believes it could be connected to Cleopatra's tomb.
Taposiris Magna has long been considered a possible location for Cleopatra's tomb. It's a temple complex dedicated to Osiris, the Egyptian god of the underworld, which, would have been a fitting burial place for a ruler who saw herself as a descendant of the gods.
And the article mentions that Martinez has found some amazing artifacts in the area, right? Statues, coins, even a bust of Cleopatra herself.
Yes, but it's important to remember that archaeology is a meticulous process. Just because these objects were found near the tunnel doesn't necessarily mean they're directly related to Cleopatra's tomb. Further excavation and analysis are needed to establish a definitive link.
Right, so it's a bit of a waiting game, but the potential is definitely there. Imagine if they actually did find Cleopatra's tomb. It would be one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of all time.
It would be an incredible find, not just for the historical artifacts it might contain, but also for the symbolic significance. Finding Cleopatra's tomb would be a powerful statement about reclaiming Egyptian history, about bringing to light a story that has been overshadowed by Roman narratives for centuries.
It would be like giving Cleopatra a voice again, after all these years. But even if we never find her tomb, the search itself is fascinating.
It is.
It tells us a lot about how we engage with history, how we try to piece together the puzzle of the past, using ancient clues and modern technology.
And it's a reminder that history is never truly finished. There are always new discoveries to be made, new interpretations to be explored, and new ways to connect with the lives of those who came before us.
Speaking of different interpretations,
Yeah.
it's interesting to think about how Cleopatra's story, and especially her death, has been portrayed in art and literature throughout the centuries.
Ah, yes. From ancient Roman sculptures to Shakespearean plays to Hollywood blockbusters, Cleopatra has been reimagined countless times.
It's like her story is this blank canvas, onto which artists and writers have projected their own ideas about power, femininity, and the allure of the exotic.
Exactly. For example, some Roman depictions, they portray her as this manipulative seductress, a threat to the stability of the Roman Empire. But in other representations, she's a tragic heroine, a victim of circumstance. And then there are the more sensual portrayals, especially from the Victorian era, where she's often shown in a reclining pose, almost like inviting the asp's bite.
Wow. That's so interesting. The way she's depicted, it really reflects the cultural values and anxieties of the time.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder what Cleopatra herself would think of all these different interpretations of her life and death. Would she recognize herself in any of them?
That's a question we can only speculate about. But it is a fascinating thought experiment. It reminds us that history is not just about facts and dates. It's about stories And those stories are always being shaped and reshaped by the people who tell them.
Exactly. And in the case of Cleopatra, those stories, they continue to captivate us, challenge us, and make us question our assumptions about the past.
Okay, so we've explored the historical context of Cleopatra's death, the different theories about how it happened, and the ongoing search for her tomb. We've even looked at the various ways she's been portrayed in art and literature throughout the centuries. It's really amazing how, even after all these centuries, she still fascinates us.
She really does. I think it's because her story touches on so many universal themes: power, ambition, love, betrayal, and ultimately, the struggle for survival against, overwhelming odds.
Yeah, it's like her life was this Shakespearean tragedy, played out on a grand scale.
Yeah.
Beyond all the drama and intrigue, what are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive? What can we learn from Cleopatra's story, even if we might never know all the answers?
Well, I think one of the most important lessons is to be wary of simple narratives. As we've seen, the story of Cleopatra's death is full of contradictions, conflicting accounts, layers of interpretation. History is rarely black and white. It's crucial to approach these stories with a critical eye, question our assumptions, and consider multiple perspectives.
So don't just accept the first version you hear.
Right.
Dig a little deeper. Explore the sources. Be open to the possibility that there might be more to the story than meets the eye.
Exactly. And I think another takeaway is that the pursuit of knowledge, even if it doesn't lead to a definitive answer, can be incredibly rewarding. The search for Cleopatra's tomb is a perfect example. Even if we never find her final resting place, the efforts to locate it, they've revealed so much about ancient Egyptian culture, religious practices, and the challenges of archaeological research.
Yeah. It's like the journey is just as important as the destination.
Absolutely. And finally, I think Cleopatra's story reminds us of the power of narrative, how the stories we tell about the past, they really shape our understanding of the present. Cleopatra has been cast as, well, a seductress, a villain, a victim, a heroine. And each of these portrayals reflects the values and biases of the time in which they were created. It's a reminder that history is not just about facts and dates. It's about how we choose to remember and interpret those facts.
So if you're listening out there, we'll leave you with this final thought. If Cleopatra could choose how her story would be told, what version would she prefer? The tragic queen, the cunning politician, the defender of her kingdom, or something else entirely? Explore the sources, form your own conclusions, and let us know what you think.